Hey everyone, welcome back to the RTS podcast. Here we are, post Raw Nationals 2017, and I think we're all still kind of gathering our thoughts and sort of resting up after a crazy week, really. It was really great. Our athletes did really well. We had a great time. Takes a lot of effort and energy to put on a meet like that, or to even participate in a meet like that. So we're still kind of processing, I would say, processing that competition. So for the podcast today, we kind of talk about it, and we just kind of start off talking about the competition, but then we end up in a conversation about cutting weight, recomping weight. It's not a really thorough plan that we're trying to lay out, but just sort of some advice and observations and some good ideas, do's and don'ts sort of things. So I think there's some good ideas in here, some useful perspectives, and ultimately we wanted to bring that to you guys, and hopefully you can get something out of it and compete better in the next competition that you do. Before we get into it, I just want to mention real quick that the RTS coaching staff is going to be putting on a seminar in Brooklyn. It's going to be at the South Brooklyn Weightlifting Club. It's going to be on November 4th and 5th. So it's not far away. If you would like to attend, you can register for that. It's real easy to do. Just go to store.reactivetrainingsystems.com, click on coaching, and if you scroll down near the bottom of the page, you'll see a link for the seminar registration. And there you'll be able to register for the seminar, see the full lesson list and whatnot. Now, for the people who are attending in person, you'll get to participate in the entire seminar, all the presentations, the Q&As, the social time that we have built in, the training sessions, all of it. And it's only $50 for the entire weekend. So we wanted to do the seminar in as low a cost way as possible. And kind of in keeping with that theme, the second way that you can participate in the seminar is by watching on a live stream. We're going to stream the presentation portion of the seminar only, but we'll be streaming it live on our YouTube channel. So that will be available for you to watch for free. And if you want to check this out, we definitely encourage you to do that. Some of the presentation topics, just kind of off the top of my head here, I'm going to be presenting on personality and training. Some of you may know that we did a personality investigation to try to see if there are anything that we can tell about how personality affects training or any sort of relationship there. We started doing an investigation on that, I think a couple months ago now. So I want to present our findings from that investigation for the first time ever in a public forum. So I'll be presenting on that. I'll also be presenting on emerging strategies, which is a really, really useful training planning tool. It's a method that I use, and all of us, all the RTS coaches use for planning training, and it's really made a huge impact on the quality of training that we can deliver to our athletes, our ability to adapt that training to the athlete response, and so on. We're also going to have presentations from Dr. Roy Alter on injury prevention, which is a big topic, obviously. We're going to have presentations on performance nutrition, on mental aspects of training and competing, and just powerlifting. And then we're also going to have a presentation on developing your own coaching philosophy. We'll have plenty of time for Q&As and whatnot. It's going to be a really good time. These things are always a lot of fun. So if you're around Brooklyn, or you want to be around Brooklyn on November 4th and 5th, please register and come see us and hang out with us. Space for the live portion is pretty limited, but go ahead and sign up for that if you're going to be around. And then if you'd rather just watch the live stream, you're welcome to do that. That's why it's there. So anyway, enough about the seminar and any further delays that we've got. So I just want to get right into our conversation. Thanks again for watching the RTS podcast.
Reactive Training Systems. Yeah, Nationals is just such a. Honestly, though, I think they ran it really well. Like, I think from the lifters' perspective, I think um, handling, I thought it was pretty well run. Obviously, the time of each day lasted a long time, but I didn't find there was too much issue. I don't know how you guys felt about that.
Yeah, I agree. I was really surprised. I expected more chaos. It was pretty well organized. It ran pretty
Yeah,
smoothly, I thought.
would you say that compared to last year, it was more efficient in the behind the scenes, I guess?
I
I
thought
don't
the
know. I don't know if it. I mean, last year's ran I thought pretty well as well, but I don't know. What did you think, Mike?
I mean, my main complaint is just the how crowded the warm-up room got on what was that, Friday and Saturday. I mean, it was really nuts in there during the day. I mean, the primetime sessions were wonderful. The and then kind of the by Sunday there were few enough lifters that it was, perfectly fine. It was definitely manageable. But man, it was super crowded in there on Friday and Saturday. I mean, I'm not sure what you can do about that. Like some people were saying that the venue was too small, and I guess from that perspective that it was. But I see why Robert Keller likes that venue, and to be honest, I like a lot of the aspects of it too. The fact that the meet is in the same building as the hotel, and there are restaurants there, and you can basically get to whatever you need to all in that one spot. You don't have to manage transport to different places and stuff. Like that's convenient and honestly really nice. Like I know for us coaches, it would have been really hard to get food during some of those sessions because you're just coaching back to back. Uh, so like having a food court like in the building, like you could send somebody down there and they could bring you something back in 10 minutes. So it was really easy to manage from that perspective. You didn't have to worry about having a car or anything like that. So I think there's a lot to be said for the venue. It's just that, having that many lifters go through in that number of sessions is difficult, and it's going to be crowded. But honestly, I mean, crowded warm-up room is not the worst complaint to ever be levied at a competition. So,
No,
as far as I could tell, it ran on time for the most part too, right?
Yeah, the only delays were like 15 or 30 minutes here or there, and there wasn't that many,
Right.
as compared to last year. I think it really helped to spread it out over more days than to try and cram it into 4 days.
Yeah.
I
I couldn't
understand.
imagine what that warm-up room would have been like if it would have been crammed into 4 days. It would have not been possible.
No,
So I
Yeah.
guess kudos to Robert for having the foresight to see that
Yeah.
his space wasn't going to be able to handle 4 days and stay on time.
Well, and I think a lot of that's the concession due to the primetime sessions, which honestly, I was talking with someone about like having the primetime sessions, and I kind of like them. Like I like the idea of the session because having a primetime session because you kind of get a best of both worlds scenario because there are certain things about having a big meet uh, that I like. Just having that many people there brings in more vendors. It brings in, a more, uh, I guess, just a better overall atmosphere. So those are aspects of it that I like. Of course, the negative is it's nice at a national meet to have kind of an exclusive spotlight on your top lifters, and I think the primetime session tries to uh, manage that well. I think it's kind of a good combination. So, I'm a fan of it.
I liked it.
yeah,
I mean, I only coached two lifters, but when I was handling them, I mean, obviously the warm-up room is busy, but difficult to communicate with the lifters to try to mitigate any delays from warm-ups and kind of timing everything properly. I was surprised personally, but I didn't have as much experience back there as you guys did.
Yeah, it was definitely a manageable thing. Like, it's crowded, and some people have more of a problem with that than others. But everybody, for the most part, seems. I didn't see any problems like people not getting along or people not being able to do their warm ups. I think we were pretty, um, even-handed about making sure that everybody got what they needed. It could be a little bit difficult, as far as timing goes. It's always nice, if you're warming up on your own space and everything, like the people in the primetime session were able to. But, I mean, most of us, for most of our career, when we would warm up at meets, you're sharing warm up platforms. Like, that's not a big deal, So, yeah, crowded, but overall, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of like it almost feels like nitpicking to focus on it for me
Yeah,
anyway.
I would agree. I thought it was pretty manageable.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing that I saw, I know I've mentioned it to the three of you guys already, but one thing I saw while we were there that, I don't know, struck me as humorous at least was saw someone eating a pie in the warm-up room. So like they had weighed in, and I guess refeeding after a weigh-in, but just eating a pie. And
Wait, you like ask? Did you try to get some of that?
well, like it was kind of a weird mix, right? Because at first I was like, kind of had the gross powerlifter sort of reaction, but then it's like, it's not a bad idea. Because I know for me personally, after weigh-ins, a lot of times, like I don't feel like eating anything. I don't. I'm a little nervous and everything, and just don't feel like eating, but I know that I need to. So what I've always done is, or done for the last several years, is opt for peanut butter and jelly, just because it's easy to eat, it's calorie dense. It's a pie also fits that fits that description. So I mean, like, admit it, guys. You've always wanted to eat a pie out of like just eat out of the middle of a pie. Like you've always
That guy
wanted
was.
to do that, but you've always had like the self-control not to just be a slob. But
I think the only thing
it's-
that could make that better was if the guy was wearing Andy Oskow's squat huge eat pie shirt.
Oh yeah.
I wonder if that's where it came from.
By the way,
But yeah, I mean, I thought, man, what a good idea.
it's funny. It's funny you mentioned calorie dense food, because when I've had a few lifters working with me on nutrition, and we were kind of experimenting with moderate water cut, but implementing some of the things that some other non-traditional strategies. I guess people kind of rely on the water cut and sodium load, the sodium cut. We were just trying to kind of clear out the colon, which sounds disgusting, but essentially there's a lot of extra water and weight just from the food you're eating. And a lot of people probably already know this and have used this strategy, but I haven't really been implementing it much with my lifters. But essentially the idea is just kind of eat lower weight foods. So like the actual weight of the food is low, so that when you, like for 3 days, it's just minimally, it's just like literally light foods that are actually higher in calories and higher density, so that you can still get a total net calories that you're used to, but you're not loading up your gut with weight. And so the idea is it's low fiber, so you can. This is kind of the experimental phase, because some people with low fiber, they won't have any type of bowel movement, and that's the kind of idea, is to get everything out of your system, so that essentially you don't have to water cut or sodium cut. You just literally weigh less because you have less inside of you.
Yeah, I can attest to that, because after the Arnold last year, when I missed weight again, I was talking with Hanny, and he helped me and wrote a diet cut plan for me for a local meet, and we experimented with it, and I lost like 9 pounds. And I did the same thing again for Raw Nationals, and I lost like 8 pounds, and I still had a steak the night before. And that's a big part of it, is that gut manipulation and removing a lot of the carbs and trading carbs for fats towards the later part of the week. And then especially reduction of fiber. And that very last day is supposed to be a liquid diet, but I was tracking real low. So that's why I ended up actually having a steak that night before for dinner.
Well, I was actually talking with Tina Dinishmed. I'm probably butchering her last name. I apologize, Tina. But she basically was just eating chocolate-covered almonds for like 3 days, which I thought, wow, I should have thought of that. The only issue is those might have too much fiber, but I mean, imagine just eating. She said she eats like 4,000 calories with chocolate a day for like 3 days and loses like 10 pounds because it's such a low amount of weight for her food. And that was really cool.
I know Rory has done a lot with that as well. She talks about using rice cakes as a low weight food. But yeah, just kind of doing some things in those last couple days to manipulate your weight. That's not necessarily dehydrating or things that are going to affect your overall performance. I mean, I think it's a good idea. And experimentation with those things is prudent. Yeah, I think it's good stuff.
I think the hardest part for me the first time I did it was because it was volumetrically so much lower of food. I had a hard time like finding and spacing it out throughout the day so that I didn't feel miserably hungry at the end of the day. So it was good to run that on a local meet. And then this cut went much easier. I was able to spread it out a little more. And I didn't feel like overly hungry towards the end of the day. It felt a lot better. And I think performance reflected that as well.
So
yeah, another thing I was
just going to say, we're going to postpone Ross's 93 kilo debut for a little while then.
Definitely.
All right.
I think the biggest thing in all of this is I always talk about eating things that you're comfortable with, because like if you have any gastrointestinal issues, a lot of these protocols might not work. Like you need to make sure that you know what you respond to food wise, because this is kind of a weird taboo subject, I guess, but I always remember how uncomfortable it was. Like, for example, if I did a 24-hour weigh-in, I'd cram food down my stomach, and then I'd be like, oh, how awesome is this? But then the next day, it's like, okay, I don't really want to squat right now because nothing feels good, and then I can't get the pressure I want when I'm squatting. But anyway, the point is to just get food that you're comfortable with, so that if you are gonna refeed, especially after the weigh-in, you don't feel like, I guess, in your stomach. So having that individuality with your food and knowing what you prefer, it's important for this strategy to work.
Yeah. You touched on another thing there that's I think is important. Just kind of being prepared for the weigh-in. And I see kind of like a 50-50 on this. You see some lifters that really work the weight cut and do a good job with it, and they've planned their recomp after that. But then other lifters kind of don't, and it seems like heavier lifters don't plan as much, and I'm not sure quite why that is, but you'll see some lifters, like as soon as they get off the scale, like they have something to drink, and they've planned it out as far as their fluid intake, and they're gonna they've got this much carbs in this amount of fluid, and then they're gonna mix that with just straight water, and like there's a whole plan for it, right? And then other lifters are like, well, I've weighed in, I guess it's time to go eat something, and then we go somewhere to eat, and we're waiting and whatnot, and it's just like time wasted, which if you didn't have to cut very much, it maybe isn't a big deal, but for those people that are really working the weight cut, time is of the essence, especially in a 2-hour weigh-in scenario. There's just some physiological limits to how much you can put back into your body and then usefully absorb in the time frame that you've got. So it's important to make the most of that time.
Yeah, I think a lot of people just forget. Go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say, you must have been talking about our lunch, Mike.
Well, that certainly didn't help. You had kind of a not good experience, but I think you'd fall in the category of somebody who didn't have to cut weight that hard, so it's probably not that big of a deal. But I don't know. I'm kind of taking notes on a lot of this stuff, so I've never really had to do serious weight cuts before to make 120. Um, and I'm currently not scheduled for any competitions, but eventually that will change, and I think it would be nice to work that angle of competing as well.
Well, that brings up another subject, which maybe Jim, you can chime in here, and that's the way, in my mind, it helps me with strength gains to be operating on a caloric excess, for months prior to a meet, and to put on some extra weight and so on and so forth. But at the same time, you got to take that weight off. And so, to get back into your weight class. So, I was thinking about, if you're having a hard time, or even a harder and harder time, like I am, staying into my weight class, and I was thinking about starting to try to get leaner, which would mean, whatever, months out, or a couple months out at least. That would mean a caloric deficit. I just wonder about the trade-off between a hard weight cut and uh, potential strength gains that you're giving up by being in a caloric deficit for a couple of months.
Yeah, I can definitely chime in on that. And that, I was actually just having a conversation about this with one of my clients from California. It's kind of a long-term plan. He wasn't sure if he wanted to compete as a 83 or stay in the 63 class. Kind of for similar reasons, I guess. But he doesn't have much weight to cut. So I guess in your scenario, all of that is really dependent on how strict you can be with your diet, because a lot of people I work with can maintain or even gain strength while they're cutting it. But I think a lot of that also has to do with how consistent they are with their nutrition. Are they tracking everything? Are they making sure they're getting their protein intake? Are they actually splitting their protein intake so it's not just like one bolus? Because at a certain amount of time, like, all the little things are going to add up, and especially when you're cutting and you're training with such high intensities and with your developmental phases, everything kind of adds up. So that's going to be very individual dependent. But I think a lot of people mentally are afraid that they're going to get weaker just because they're cutting. But I think a lot of that is going to be mitigated by slowing down the cut. The amount of weight you're losing in a month is minimized. So it's a longer term plan versus, what I see a lot of people doing is they'll bulk 10 pounds and then lose 5. And then, they go through these really extreme, really quick bulks and cuts, which makes it difficult to make weight. And then every time they cut, they lose, they're worried about losing strength because it's so quick. But when you've already developed your strength and your muscular development as yourself, both processes it's gonna be important. So, and getting a hold of what works best for you nutritionally, I think it's going to be the best strategy. And that way, you probably are going to be able to gain strength and be leaner, and not have to cut every time for the meet. And even you could bulk into the meet, which would be cool, because if you're undercovered, from the high stress, you could start eating more, and it wouldn't be a big deal. I think that hopefully that kind of answers that.
Yeah, it absolutely, I think it absolutely does.
So just to kind of weigh in on this, and I'm going to use Ross's example just because the numbers are convenient. But say that, you're able to cut 8 pounds fairly easily going into the competition, or not, maybe easily is the wrong choice of word, but reliably is probably a better choice.
Yeah, it's not that easy, but it's manageable.
Yeah,
it's not completely miserable, but it's not super easy. You definitely got to be careful and
right,
like be on point with what you're doing.
Yeah, so not easy, but reliably, you know.
Right.
Um, at that point, you know, you kind of know what your limit is in terms of how heavy can you get, and you just kind of need to manage your weight outside of, uh, you know, in your normal training cycle, so that you know when it's time to start the weight cut, you're at least not any more than 8 pounds over. But you know, obviously, that's going to vary from person to person depending on the size of the athlete. Um, the other kind of piece to this that I wanted to add in, a thing that I've been experimenting with a lot more lately has been kind of alternating my caloric surplus and my caloric deficit cycles. Excuse me. So, um, if I'm doing a development cycle, like a normal loaded training period, then I try to be in a surplus. Um, so when I'm in a development cycle, so like one of these normal loaded training phases, I try to be in a surplus during those. And it's a mild surplus. So I'm trying to gain, a fairly small amount of weight over the course of this development cycle. And then when I go into my pivot blocks or restoration block or a deload or whatever you have and whatever you call it, I'll try to do um, a deficit during that training phase. It's a moderate deficit. It's nothing super severe, but it's enough to kind of mitigate some of the weight gain during the development cycle. So if you kind of plot this out, what it looks like is a mild weight gain over the course of the year. So by doing that, you're able to kind of maximize the number of development cycles you can spend in a surplus, and hopefully that's better for you all around.
Yeah, I really am curious how, like, what the benefit would be other than, I mean, psychologically, I think all of this is really important because I have lifters who are psychologically, they're like, I'm going to get weaker when I'm cutting. And if you tell yourself that, not only that is the negative impact of any cutting gonna be more, it's gonna be more kind of just hits you right in the face. But then you're kind of internalizing it, and everything just kind of makes sense. Oh, I'm cutting, I'm getting weaker, I'm going to get weaker. Everything's just, it's a negative feedback loop. So I think mentally, if you can tell yourself that you're going to get stronger if you're in a surplus during the developmental block, and then you're also kind of like, well, the cut isn't going to be weaker during the washout phase, then I think that'd be really interesting to see. Okay, well, what if you just keep the surplus minimal the whole year? And that's honestly what I would recommend for most people. If they can keep gaining weight, is just keep the surplus minimal, because you're not going to gain that much more muscle from a 700 calorie surplus as you would from a 300 calorie surplus, and you'll minimize any fat gain. But like for someone like Mark, where you're already over your weight class, more complicated in how you want to approach it.
I'm sorry, you got cut off there at the end, Jim. You said it gets more complicated in how you want to what?
Oh, I said it gets more complicated in how you want to approach the long-term plan, because there's a lot of ways. Like you can essentially say, well, my maximum weight I want to be is, let's say, 108. If you compete in the 105s, the maximum you want to be over is 108, because that's what's comfortable for you. You don't seem to notice any negative strength effects as you cut. It's also really easy for you to get to the 105s. And that way, the whole year you can be in a slight caloric surplus, so you're not having a negative impact on, or you can get leaner, because that feels more comfortable for you to eat a little bit less. But again, you're going to want to control that. That way, maybe it's more comfortable for you to just bulk into the meat the same way. It just really depends on, like, it's not just like what's optimal physiologically, it's what's optimal for you psychologically. And everyone's going to have their different preferences. I mean, some people want to be 15 pounds over because they don't care about doing a 15-pound cut, but then you got to weigh, how much does that impact their strength? And a lot of times people don't know, because every time they go to the meet, their strength is down 20 pounds, but they wouldn't know that because that's their average. They're like, well, I just perform poorly at meets or whatever. Like, so I guess what I'm saying is there's a lot of variables no matter what strategy you go with, and there's a lot more than just what's physiologically optimal. Is that making sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess well, to go to an extreme, say if I went up to 245 pounds or 250, like one of my lifters, he got all the way up to 250, and then he got back down to 231. Well, training at 240, 245, 250, he was getting really strong. And if he stayed at, say, high 230s or 235 that entire time instead, I just wonder if his strength gains would have been the same, or I can't believe they'd be better, but you see what I'm saying.
What do you know how he responded to the cut?
He seemed to fare fairly well, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I mean, so that's the other thing.
You can look at the training performances, and see kind of what you would expect based on the training performances, and then kind of what really happened during the competition. But one thing that I'm obviously a big fan of is the self-experimentation piece. So if you did a cut, even if it's kind of like a standard cut for someone your weight, and you don't seem to like it, or you don't seem to handle it well, so I was just talking about wanting to manage my own, or be a bit more aggressive in my own weight cuts in the future. That's not a thing that I've enjoyed in the past, and it's not a thing that I wanted to manage before. So I've kind of shied away from doing it. And I think that's kind of what Jim's getting at as far as like the psychological impact of it. Like if you don't like doing it and you perceive that it is having a negative impact, then try it the other way and compare the results. If you, have a better performance, leading into a competition by keeping your weight down and having a more mild cut, then that's obviously the way to go. But if you can have a better performance by being a bit more aggressive with your cut, because you can manage it well and you do well with the refeed after and all that stuff, then great. It's all about whatever's going to make that best performance on the platform.
Yeah, I got a lifter that she absolutely hates doing any of the water cut stuff, and anytime she does the water load and water cut and any of the manipulation with water, come meet day, she doesn't even want to lift anymore. She's just over it.
Yeah. Well, I just think that's such an important thing. It's like we can talk about what's like optimal all the time, and I think it's kind of what I'm going to be talking a little bit about the upcoming seminars, that like people put so much emphasis on like whatever it is. But my first thought was like the whole bulking. Like love to do these. I'm gonna bulk finally. Like I'm gonna bulk. I'm gonna get freaking jacked now, and then they just add like 20 pounds of muscle in 3 months, and it's like, well, how much of that is muscle? Like yeah, you got excited about bulking, but like it's okay. Well, now you're 20 pounds over your weight class. Like that idea is just I think overrated. Like I think a lot of people don't want to do the slow, methodical, we're going to bulk for a year. And then, because I mean, think about it. If you're going to be if you want to compete in the 83 weight class and you've been competing in the 63 weight class, realistically, you're not going to be, I guess, in your ideal body weight where you have a lot more muscle and not that much fat for like 2 or 3 years. And so you really have to commit to that decision, because I was talking to this guy yesterday, like, let's say we go with a more moderate approach where we're really optimizing that P ratio, the ratio between muscle and fat that you're gaining per pound. Like, we got 12 months in a year, right? So if we go half a pound to a pound a month, that's 12 pounds a year. If you're starting at 163, you're looking at 174, 175 at the end of the year, and that's if we're being smart. We could probably gain 12 pounds in 3 months, but there's not going to be any more muscle gained in that time frame, and it's just not that smart, because then you're gonna have to cut all that fat, just because one, you're not going to be competitive in the AE3 class anyway, because we haven't spent enough time growing into it, and two, you got to cut more, so that's no fun. So you got to really think about it in the long term as well as the short term, which is difficult because everyone wants to compete optimally all the time. But I think that's probably the biggest decision and most difficult decision, is when you're moving weight classes, how you want to approach it.
Right.
Beer and pizza.
Bryce Lewis comes up as an example for this a lot, as far as someone who went from 93 to 105 slowly and methodically, and did a really great job of it. Now, talking to Eric Helms, Bryce's coach, he didn't think that was going to work. He thought that, he was going to move up to 105, and, Bryce wasn't going to get that much stronger. He was, not going to get a lot more competitive at 105, just because if you're not adding muscle as you're getting heavier, then you're probably not adding that much new strength. And, so he didn't think it was going to work. But I just bring that up to say that a lot of times, we don't know up front that, like, for sure that this is a thing that's going to work or not. So you've got to, try, you've got to go into it, of course, execute intelligently, but evaluate continuously as you go. If you're gaining weight and not getting any stronger, if your Wilks score is going down, then maybe you're not going to be more competitive in your new class, and you should really consider that decision carefully. Be attuned to the feedback that you're getting as you're moving up.
Most definitely.
Well, I think we've kind of covered what we can cover here, and I think we're all still recovering a bit from the week of chaos that was Raw Nationals this year. So thanks, guys, for hanging out. Thanks for sharing your thoughts and wisdom with us, and thanks everyone for listening. I'll see you guys.
Reactive Training Systems.